You're a good girl. Tyrannus. Owen. Bridget. Carnunos. Before me, the vulture of the sky and the powers of air in the east. And behind me, the bass of wisdom and the powers of water in the west. And on my right, the white stag and the powers of fire in the south. And on my left, the great bear and the powers of earth in the north. For around me glow the pentagrams, and within me shine the three rays of light. Welcome to Exploring Being on Earth. I am your Crafty Druid, Ted Kaiser, here in the Sacred Grove in the Frontenac Arch Biosphere Reserve. If you were with me last week, you'll know that now that I've opened the circle, we're about to move on and explore some news from the tamed world, as well as some artistic expressions. And also, if you were here with me last week, you'll see this week that fall is progressing and we've got more leaves turning color and more leaves falling, but still beautiful to be here in the Sacred Grove. So we're going to start off with exploring some current events, some news from the tamed world, and we're going to be focusing on some beings, our friends from the element of water first. As we get into some human artistic expression, we'll look at the t-shirt I'm wearing today. This is the Ace of Discs by Heilung, the great German neo-pagan band. So looking forward to sharing some of that with you. But first, let's start with some of the news. Each week as we explore being on Earth, we'll check in with current events in the wild world and in the tamed world. You know, news can be scary and depressing, but climate change is happening, and for me, I find it's best to know what's going on, to be able to react to it and find ways to cope with it. So each week, I'll share news items from the tamed world that have floated to the top in my attention, and I'll read some highlights from each article. So, on to the news. The biggest news of the week is a shocking development in an ongoing clash of two states representing two of the three main branches of Abrahamic religions. And I'll come back to that story at the end of my check on tamed world news. First though, let's explore a group of related stories that I had been tracking before that world-shaking story broke. This group of stories concerns the health of our planet's oceans and the creatures who make their home there, especially fish, and particularly salmon. There are 7 news items that caught my attention, and 5 of them were published in the space of a single week, between September 26th and October 3rd. The other 2 include one from earlier in September, and the oldest one, which is from late July. Since there are many articles, I won't go over each article in quite as much depth as I did last week. Instead, I'll cover the highlights of each item chronologically, and then summarize the theme that emerges within these related stories. In the first news story about salmon, it was reported by Jackson Guilfoyle in the Eureka Times Standard that there would be no salmon at the 59th annual Klamath Salmon Festival due to poor fish populations. The local indigenous people, the Yurok Nation, host and operate the festival and made the decision. In the article, Guilfoyle further quoted Yurok Chair Joseph James as saying, "The decision reflects our sacred responsibility to take care of the Klamath River's fish stocks. In addition to not catching fish for the festival, we are not going to harvest any salmon this year to protect the overall fish population." The statement regarding the decision that was released by the Yurok listed causes of the low population of local salmon, including environmental damage caused by water diversions for agriculture, disease, man-made barriers, past damage from logging and mining, and the legacy of dams on the Klamath River. I did some additional research and discovered that the Yurok tribe declared personhood for the Klamath River in 2019. This additional research also revealed that the first river to be granted personhood in Canada was the Magpie River in Quebec in 2021. The idea of non-human persons is an important part of the animistic worldview, which is a fundamental part of Druidry as I see it, and a topic I will explore further in future videos. The second news item also concerns declining salmon populations, this time in Japan, as reported by Justin McCurry in The Guardian. In this case, people involved in the tourist industry who provide tours for visitors to see the land, sea, and wildlife in the Shiratoko UNESCO World Natural Heritage Site realized, based on their wildlife observations, that salmon stocks were in severe decline. What they saw in particular was the poor health of brown bears, who rely on salmon in the fall before the winter season, and significant reductions in available food. Tour boat cruise operator Katsuya Noda noticed that some bears have grown really thin. They are having a tough time. There are no fish in the rivers, just like last year. Masami Yamanaka, a researcher at the Shiratoko Nature Foundation, told the Asahi Shimbun that the lack of salmon, combined with a poor acorn harvest, was having a devastating effect on brown bear cubs. An estimated 70 to 80% of the cubs from this year are dead, Yamanaka said. It's a really serious situation. A very important part of this story is that it identifies several aspects of relationships within the local food web. The brown bears are a top predator. They rely on producer or plant food sources, including acorns, and also secondary consumers such as salmon. And this food web, located in estuaries where fresh water meets the ocean along seashores and riverbanks, is one of the most important examples on Earth of a very uncommon food web, since it comprises both ocean and land biomes, while the majority of food webs are confined to a single ecosystem. The third news item is the final one this week that also concerns declining wild salmon populations, this time in Alaska. According to this article by Kavitha George, published on the nonprofit news organization K2's website, climate change is a major contributor to the Yukon River salmon collapse. Scientists know one thing for sure about the collapse of Yukon River king and chum salmon. There's more than one culprit. It's really hard and probably unrealistic to just point your finger at one thing and say that's what's doing it, said Jade Ferguson, a fish pathologist with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. Researchers have identified many threats facing Yukon king and chum salmon, and those threats pop up at each stage of the salmon life cycle. When salmon hatch in freshwater streams, as they swim down the Yukon to the ocean, where they spend most of their lives, and on their arduous journey back upriver to spawn and die. Scientists think many of these threats are connected to climate change. As we just discussed, salmon migrate between the saltwater ocean and freshwater estuary biomes, and also connect with shoreline land biomes as secondary consumer food sources for top predators like bears. This research shows that they are vulnerable to multiple problems caused by climate change in each biome they inhabit at various stages of their migratory life cycle. In the fourth news item, we turn to a different dynamic, salmon farming. As reported by Vicki Allen in the Herald, 210,000 salmon died at a single salmon farm at the island of Mull in Scotland in 1 month. At the time, in July 2023, Allen reported that this incident at Geesegill Farm was the single worst mortality event in Scottish salmon farm history. This incident meant that the mortality rate for the Geesegill Farm in July was 23.7%. Compared to other salmon farms in Scotland for the month of July 2023, Geesegill did not experience the loss of the greatest number of fish, but it was the site of the biggest mass of mortalities. The 210,000 fish amounted to around 546 tons of salmon. And the overall mortality rate across all salmon farms in Scotland for that month was 2.49%, a significant increase over the 1.63% during the same month in 2022. As for the cause of increasing salmon mortality at fish farms, Tavish Scott, the chief executive of Salmon Scotland, the member organization representing fish farms as the voice of the industry in Scotland, stated that Scotland's salmon farmers have been open and transparent about the challenge we face due to warming seas, which is likely to have an effect on survival rates over the coming months. Bakkafrost, the company that owns the Geesegill Salmon Farm, has reduced its revenue forecast for the year, as have other salmon farming companies operating in Scotland, including Norwegian-owned Scottish Sea Farms, which reduced its estimated harvest volume for 2023 by more than a quarter as a result of what they cite as biological problems. The biological problems are caused in large part by the increasing temperatures of ocean waters, which is a leading factor contributing to jellyfish blooms and increasing infestations of sea lice. According to UK vegan charity Viva Campaigns, investigators for Viva Campaigns monitoring 5 salmon farms in the Scottish Highlands around Loch Carron, Loch Kishorn, and Loch Torridon have captured monstrous footage of Atlantic salmon being eaten alive by invasions of parasitic sea lice. Some sea cages were also found to be surrounded by large blooms of jellyfish, further threatening the health and well-being of farmed salmon as well as wild species. But not only charities are aware of this problem. Regan Jacobson, CEO of Bakkafrost, said, "We have had a range of issues to do in Scotland. Unfortunately, it takes time to change it. What we see right now is mainly jellyfish, which are coming in huge swarms or blooms." So, again, the relationships between species in food webs is a powerful dynamic that, in this case, challenges human attempts to intervene as top predators in the existing natural food webs. In the fifth news item, also related to salmon farming, we see another aspect of impact on natural food webs caused by salmon farming. But, in this case, rather than increasing populations of wild species within the natural ocean habitats surrounding fish farms, the presence of fish farms is reducing nearby wild populations in Tasmania. In this news story, published on the Perth Now website, Tracy Ferrier of the Australian Associated Press reports that the human activity of salmon farming was the primary threat to an ancient species, the Maugeen skate. Tracy reported that the skates were barely hanging on in Macquarie Harbour, and scientists have warned it could be one extreme weather event away from extinction. The federal government has called for urgent action to address low oxygen levels and said destocking fish pens was the fastest way to achieve that. However, Industry Association Salmon Tasmania announced that fish producers would pursue a potential engineering solution. What they plan to do is artificially raise oxygen levels by using a barge and pumps to suck water from the sea, inject it with oxygen bubbles, and pump it back into deep sections of the harbor. It made no mention of destocking. In response, environmental charity the Bob Brown Foundation ridiculed the announcement, saying the industry position and plan to artificially raise oxygen levels completely ignores the fact that if fish farms were never in the harbor in the first place, the Maugeen skate wouldn't be on the edge of extinction. And all that pumping out, gas injection, and pumping back in is undoubtedly very energy and carbon intensive, which significantly increases the carbon footprint of salmon farming. In the sixth and final news story about salmon farming, Karen McVeigh reported in The Guardian that thousands of salmon escaped an Icelandic fish farm and could devastate local salmon populations. Suspected escapees have now been found in at least 32 rivers across northwest Iceland, according to unconfirmed social media posts, one of which showed fish covered in sea lice, a parasite that can be lethal to wild fish. Iceland's Marine and Freshwater Research Institute confirmed that farmed fish have been found in multiple rivers. The escape at a pen in Patreksfjörður, owned by Arctic Fish, one of the country's largest salmon farming companies, which is owned by Norwegian salmon giant Maui, has reignited calls from environmentalists, sport fishers, and some politicians to restrict or ban open pen fish farming. It is not the first big escape. Just last year, another salmon farming company, Arnarlax, was fined £705,000 for not reporting an escape of 81,000 fish in 2021. Studies have shown interbreeding between farmed and wild fish produces offspring that mature faster and younger, undermining the ability of the species to reproduce in nature. There are 3 reasons scientists say that this particular escape is so disastrous. The fish are entering many rivers over a large area. They are in greater numbers than ever seen before, and a high percentage are mature, ready to breed. So, not only are salmon farms threatened by climate change, leading farmers to attempt geoengineering solutions that will only increase carbon emissions, stimulating additional warming, a vicious cycle. We now see that salmon farming also represents a direct threat against wild salmon populations, which are already under serious threat due to climate change and ocean warming. The attempts to counter the harmful effects of climate change on salmon farming with measures that only cause further climate change and threaten wild salmon demonstrate that salmon farming is not a viable longer-term food strategy for humanity and also represents a serious threat to the wild population. In the 7th and final news story, as published on the BBC News website without a byline, the removal of a century-old dam on the River Dee will aid salmon revival. The demolition of the Garlogie Dam will give wild Atlantic salmon access to 20 kilometers of spawning habitat. The work will also restore burn and riverbank habitats which were submerged below a reservoir for over 100 years. The project, delivered by the River Dee Trust and the Dee District Salmon Fishery Board, was paid for by the Scottish Government's Water Environment Fund. Removal of the 5-meter-high dam will also allow for habitat restoration of a 3.5 hectare site further upstream. Over the next 12 months, work, including tree planting and wetland restoration, will change the area that was previously the reservoir into a haven for wildlife. So that's hopeful news. 4 main things about this group of stories stand out for me. First, the 7 stories that all relate to dwindling salmon populations are from all over the world, involving 4 continents, Asia, Australia, North America, and Europe. 6 countries, Japan, Scotland, Iceland, the United States, Canada, and Tasmania. And 11 oceans and seas. North Atlantic Ocean, the North Sea, Labrador Sea, and Norwegian Sea. The North Pacific Ocean, the Sea of Japan, Sea of Okhotsk, and the Bering Sea. The Indian Ocean, and the Southern Ocean and Tasman Sea. Salmon, a single type of migratory fish, connect these far-flung areas, demonstrating a critical relationship between these distant places and illustrating the Gaia principle that I mentioned in the previous video, which is that in crucial ecological ways, the entire planet is one organism. Second, all the stories illustrate a man against nature theme. In most of the cases, corporate interests that seek to exploit natural resources for profit oppose local and indigenous people in their attempts to sustainably manage resources. As the Yurok tribe states on their own website, our way was never to over-harvest and to always ensure sustainability of our food supply for future generations. The worldview and mindset that falsely disconnects humans from nature underlies the behavior of these corporate interests, and is another topic I will return to in future videos. However, the behavior of the local people is hopeful. In contrast to the theme of the previous video, which was focused on human beings making bad decisions, 2 of the stories highlight humans who have used their authority and power to make better decisions. The Yurok stopped salmon fishing on the Klamath River, and the Scots removed the Garlogie Dam on the River Dee. These decisions are both at very local levels, affecting relatively small areas. However, they are clear steps in the right direction, and I hope they foreshadow a shift in the quality and character of decisions being made, a change we will monitor in future videos. For those of us, like me, who try to find ways to be able to take action against climate change, what's happened in these 2 cases are good examples and hope for the future. Sadly, though, the 4th point raised by the articles is that declining salmon populations are a key indicator demonstrating that overall health of ocean ecosystems is in serious jeopardy. Warming of waters is the major source of the trouble. Salmon are like the proverbial canary in the coal mine with respect to this serious problem. As outlined in the Too Hot story, salmon are cold-blooded. Since they can't regulate their internal temperatures, when water heats beyond 65 Fahrenheit, serious physiological problems ensue for salmon, including misshapen proteins in cells, reduced oxygenation in the blood and body tissues, and reduced food intake. As a result, disease, heat waves, and a lack of food stemming from warming waters combine and exacerbate each other, leading to the significant reductions in salmon numbers. Beyond the specifics of salmon explored in these 7 stories, many other species in the entire web of life in the oceans are similarly threatened by the continued increases in water temperature. So it's good that some people are taking action and setting good examples. We need to do something about this warming and reduce the heat in the oceans. Finally, in terms of the Israel-Hamas war story, if you've watched my previous video, I hope it won't surprise you that I have a different take on this grievous situation than most other commentators. My perspective on the tragic war unfolding is that it is an inevitable consequence of statism, playing out the dynamic of a Hobbesian trap. The key assumptions that justify statism, the need for the establishment of states, regards the evil and destruction man would carry out if not bound by the power of the state. And for many, the assumption is that man would do injustice. As Plato wrote in the Republic, they say that to do injustice is by nature good, to suffer injustice evil, but that the evil is greater than the good. And so when men have both done and suffered injustice, and have had experience of both, not being able to avoid the one and obtain the other, they think that they had better agree among themselves to have neither. Hence there arise laws and mutual covenants, and that which is ordained by law is termed by them lawful and just. This they affirm to be the origin and nature of injustice. It is a mean or compromise between the best of all, which is to do injustice and not be punished, and the worst of all, which is to suffer injustice without the power of retaliation. And justice, being at a middle point between the two, is tolerated not as a good, but as the lesser evil, and honored by reason of the inability of men to do injustice. For no man who is worthy to be called a man would ever submit to such an agreement if he were able to resist. He would be mad if he did. Such is the received account, Socrates, of the nature and origin of justice. The same assumption is at the root of Western political philosophy, represented by one of its most influential founders. Thomas Hobbes famously said that in a state of nature, human life would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. In the absence of political order and law, everyone would have unlimited natural freedoms, including the right to all things, and thus the freedom to plunder, rape, and murder. There would be an endless war of all against all. To avoid this, free men contract with each other to establish political community through a social contract, in which they all gain security in return for subjecting themselves to an absolute sovereign, one man or an assembly of men. Though the sovereign's edicts may well be arbitrary and tyrannical, Hobbes saw absolute government as the only alternative to the terrifying anarchy of a state of nature. Hobbes asserted that without a social contract, man would exist in a state of nature, which he describes as war of all against all. In other words, if people assemble into states, they enter into a social contract agreeing to give up freedom and individual sovereignty and confer the authority to carry out violence to the state leadership in exchange for protection and security of the person. However, though the state of nature disappears between individuals within a state, it is only due to the civil power, police, courts, prisons, and so on, which exists to enforce contracts. Between nations, no such power exists. Furthermore, the citizens of the state have invested the right to preserve themselves, including through violence, in the sovereignty of the state, conferring upon nation-states the right to preserve themselves through the establishment of armies and the exercise of war. Unfortunately, neighboring states often find themselves in a condition of mutual fear of an imminent attack. Without the positive influence of outside parties, this mutual distrust leads to a fear spiral. Each side builds up arms, which increases the fear of each in response. In the game theory mathematics of Nash equilibrium, although cooperation is the path to peace, mutual distrust leads states to adopt strategies with negative outcomes. Eventually, one side carries out a preemptive strike, and war ensues. Sound familiar? Now that we know how the Hobbesian trap works, let's situate it back within the basis for statism, the belief that it is necessary to establish states. It appears states exist on the basis of a sequence of two assumptions. First, without a social contract, people would exist in a state of nature characterized as nasty, brutish, and violent, or war of all against all. Second, the only, or at least best way, of realizing the social contract is through the transfer of individual sovereignty to the institutions and leaders of a stratified social formation with exclusive authority to exercise violence, the state. It follows that those who accept these two assumptions are most likely to be those who lead states. Those men who are most committed to the belief that most other men are out to get them and agree that the solution is to form a state are those who are by far the most likely to end up leading those states. It's not hard to see that once the life paths of millions of people are subsumed under the will of a single person or ruling class of state leaders, who are the most likely to believe the leaders of nearby states are a source of real and imminent threats, and given the inevitable outcome of the Hobbesian trap without the positive influence of outside parties, states often find themselves at war. Simply put, once you have states, you have war. It's inevitable. As for the outbreak of war between Hamas and the Israelis, it's clear that just a small number of state leaders on both sides are responsible. The vast majority of Palestinians and Israelis are peace-loving people, victims of aggression by the small number of state leaders who are most likely to mistrust their opposites. And recall that the Hobbesian trap can be avoided with the positive influence of outside parties. The active support of the international community's involvement in the area in previous years has historically reduced the spread of distrust and slowed the fear spiral. However, the more recent policies of wealthy Western nations in Iran and the Middle East, particularly economic sanctions against Iran, has significantly contributed to neglecting and exacerbating the fear spiral. Hamas, an Iranian proxy in Gaza, was encouraged and supported by Iran, financially and militarily, to carry out the preemptive strike, causing the outbreak of war between Palestinian and Israeli state leaders. And, by the way, Iran was likely also supported in turn by its ally Russia, at least financially. Back in January 2023, a senior Iranian official was reported by Reuters to have announced that Iran and Russia had connected their interbank communication and transfer systems to help boost trade and financial transactions, as both Tehran and Moscow are chafing under Western sanctions. You can probably see that the invasion of Ukraine is also another front in the proxy war between Russia and Western nations, while also an attempt by Russia to secure the vast food resources of Ukraine, Europe's breadbasket, and one of the top 3 exporters of grain in the world. As I described in my previous video, each nation is increasingly worried about maintaining its slice of pie, even at the expense of others getting smaller. And what are sanctions if not a means for one nation to increase or maintain the size of its slice while reducing the size of slices of other nations? The shrinking pie of world resources has led to widespread failure of decision-making by state leaders and increased focus on internal concerns, meaning that fewer nations are helping, and those that do are helping less, to moderate the fear spiral in the Middle East and elsewhere. And apparently, some states, rather than moderating the fear spiral, have encouraged and armed it for much the same reasons of trying to maintain their share of dwindling global resources. We should expect further armed conflict around the planet as climate change and the resulting reduced economic prospects continue to contribute to the breakdown of interconnections between nations, resulting in local opposing pairs finding themselves in accelerating downward fear spirals. The hope, though, is that making the connection between climate change, the economy, and armed conflicts will convince more people and decision makers to recognize the dire need to stop carbon emissions from further damaging the climate. The mission of this channel is to explore being on Earth. Part of that exploration is to bridge across various fields of study. From a Druid's perspective, the Earth is a single being. Where others see divisions, Druids see connections. All creatures, including humans, are connected, as are all human activities, including creativity in the arts. So let's take a look and a listen to some great work by the awesome musicians and artists that connects to this week's theme. And the photo of the week this week features a brilliantly colored scene featuring the bright red of Virginia creeper as it covers the green of the mossy rock, surrounded by the beautiful yellow and orange colors of fall foliage in Threshold Forest. Next up, we have the song of the week, and this week we're listening to Carpathian Forest by Heilung. As I said in the intro, Heilung is a neo-pagan, neo-folk band from Europe. The 3 main members are Kai Uwe Faust from Germany, Christopher Jewell from Denmark, and Maria Franz from Norway. Much of their inspiration comes from exploring the history of Germanic peoples of the Iron Age and Viking Age. They record and perform their sophisticated compositions using unique instruments that are rooted in Iron Age history. Faust performs a throat-singing style that evokes Mongolian, Tibetan, or Inuit traditional techniques. Songs they write are rooted in their concerns for the health of the planet and all life, and their search for better ways for humans to relate to the more than human world. Their name, Heilung, is a German word that means healing, signifying their core value to promote healing of all life on Earth. I was very lucky to see them in concert in Toronto on September 1st, 2022. Their stage show, in which they perform a series of their recorded songs live, is essentially a ritual, and it is a powerful spiritual and definitely a healing experience. If you ever get a chance to see their live concert ritual, don't miss it. Here are some screenshots from the live concert video and some lyrics from Carpathian Forest. Like most of their songs, Carpathian Forest explores themes of the more than human world and harkens back to a time when we lived more closely with our more than human neighbors in the forest and other places. The song featured on their debut full-length album Ofnir that Heilung self-released in 2015, and also on their live album Lifa, released in 2017. I've included a link in the description to Heilung's Bandcamp, where you can buy their music and merch, and also to the live performance video of Carpathian Forest from Heilung's groundbreaking Castle Fest concert on YouTube. To keep up your spirits and strengthen your commitment to healing our ocean and river friends, the salmon, as well as all of our more than human world friends, listening to the music of Heilung helps a lot. Staying with Heilung now, but moving on to the t-shirt of the week, this design, called Ace of Coins, was created by Kai Faust himself. Coins relate to the element of earth, and the ace is its pure essence. The design also incorporates the number 5, a number that relates to many important symbols in Western esotericism that we can explore further in future videos. Maria made some comments related to earth and healing when she was interviewed by Elliot Fulham of Little Punk People in September of 2022 during the Heilung North American tour. Elliot asked her, "Heilung means healing. Do you have positive hopes for the earth and the human race?" Maria's answer is right on target for anyone who cares about the plight of the salmon. She answered, "I do. I see a lot of potential in the human race, and I just wish that we would get smarter a bit quicker. But I think we're going there, and yeah, there's so many initiatives going on about how to clean the oceans and how to make sustainable food sources. If we can just, skip the whole let's try to be as rich as possible as fast as possible idea, I have hopes. I do have hopes." The interview is on the Little Punk People channel on YouTube, and I've put the link in the description, so please check it out. Now it's time for the tarot card of the week. Though I first learned tarot by picking up the Crowley Thoth tarot deck way back in 1991, I've since explored many other decks. Among them are the 2 decks created by Mark Ryan, the earlier Greenwood Tarot and the later Wildwood Tarot. Mark has done many things in life. He started out in the military and British intelligence and special forces, and later became an actor, playing such roles as Nazir in the British TV series Robin of Sherwood. He has also served as swordmaster on several film and TV productions, including Antoine Fuqua's King Arthur, in which he trained the stars Keira Knightley, Clive Owen, and Stellan Skarsgård. He's also a writer who has written for DC Comics and written several screenplays. While I would love to get my hands on a deck of the rare and very expensive Greenwood Tarot as a collector, I honestly think the Wildwood deck, incorporating many improvements Mark considered after creating the original deck, better evokes the traditional Celtic, animistic, and shamanic worldview, and it's widely available. There's a link in the description to the Wild Shop website for information on where you can purchase this beautiful deck. The deck itself is inspired by and is largely consistent with our scientific knowledge of Celtic, animistic, and shamanic culture. Also, the visual design, card names and meanings, and the little white book all reflect a focus on ecology and support rich and healthy relationships between humans and the beings of the more than human world. Finally, the deck structure corresponds to the Wheel of the Year and supports connections between human and more than human spirits through alignment with nature's rhythms of 4 seasons, 4 directions, and the 4 elements. And the card this week from the Greenwood Tarot is the Salmon card. This card corresponds to the standard Queen of Cups court card, or, in the Greenwood Tarot, the Queen of Vessels. The salmon's ability to overcome great adversity, to swim upstream to its birthplace, to mate and procreate, inspires awe and respect for this powerful example of the wisdom of self-sacrifice. According to Celtic mythology, hazelnuts contain the wisdom of hazel trees, and salmon absorb this wisdom when they fall from the trees into the river pools in which salmon swim. This belief, combined with their wise behavior of self-sacrifice, makes salmon the leading example of wisdom in the shamanic tradition of Druidry. The wisdom of self-sacrifice is an important theme within the news about salmon and the Israel-Hamas conflict. In both cases, human pride, greed, and selfishness have led to destruction. Unwilling to be deprived in any way or to sacrifice any individual privilege to ensure more equitable conditions, the sum total of our selfish decisions and obsessive behavior to have it all, adding up over centuries, has brought the world to the brink of war and destruction. Declining salmon populations and global tensions leading to armed conflict both reflect this selfish and imbalanced mindset, reminding us of the wisdom of self-sacrifice. By the way, I mentioned earlier that the Israel-Hamas conflict represents a civilizational clash between two of the three Abrahamic religions. It's worth noting that the spirituality moving within the Greenwood Tarot is primarily animistic and shamanic. These are ancient spiritual beliefs and practices, existing long before the development of more recent theistic systems of faith, including pantheism, polytheism, monism, and monotheism, such as the Abrahamic religions. But is animism incompatible with such theistic faiths? For example, could a Christian also be an animist? I suggest you contemplate and explore these different systems of religion, and I'll definitely be exploring them in future videos. So, in closing, think about the salmon and its plight. We have much to learn from salmon: determination, overcoming adversity, and the wisdom of self-sacrifice. To think that human failure to rise to the challenge of the salmon's wise example has contributed to the devastating human impact on wild salmon is both ironic and sad. However, as we've seen from the Yurok and Scottish examples, there are things we can do to help, and that remains hopeful, as long as we have the courage to do what we can. My alone plenus aguron iter peludren goleni